Hello, friends. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, Catalina, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, I'm so glad I made it this time.
Me too. I know we were having some time zone issues, but we missed you and we're so glad to have you back.
I missed you too so much.
Now
Yeah.
you were doing some traveling. Where were you?
I have been in France with a project and and in Portugal and yeah, there were some meetings, but only on working on projects.
Lucky girl. Can we ask what kind of projects they were, or is it
in health in healthcare? Some of them concerning learning, like simulation and usually using IT in teaching.
Great.
And the other one is in using technology in mental health. It's interesting. I can't wait to see the outputs there. I will share some ideas if.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that. Technology in mental health, especially. I know that technology seems to be in narrative medicine the biggest roadblock for providers. Who, I take my mother for example, who she just retired, so proud of her, but she worked in the emergency room, and technology was one of the biggest hurdles for her as just a time block for her to really be able to spend time with patients, because she had to record everything, and she had to do it a certain way, and it took a certain amount of time, and it took up a certain amount of her brain, and it kept her from really being able to connect with people. So I'd love to hear more about that project if you have anything to share later.
I will for sure.
Yeah. Great. Oh, welcome. Hi, Kate. Hello. Hi, Anna. Hi, Catherine. Can you guys hear me?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Wonderful. We'll give everybody else just a few more minutes to file in. We opened up a second section this month, and so we were hoping that more friends of ours from the other side of the globe, who normally don't get priority when it comes to the time zone, that they would be able to join the second section. But I've realized that some people from our section are now joining the later one too. So we might have a really small group this time, which you guys know I love. Let me see if there's anybody else here. In the meantime, let's open up our chat boxes. And I'd love to hear if you have a word of the year that's guiding your year. I'd love to hear what your word is. I gave up on making resolutions a while ago, and instead I have a word that just becomes my theme of the year. Last year it was joy, and this year it's create for me. So I'd love to hear what yours is. Haiku, I love it, Kate. That's great. I want to see some of your haiku, Kate. I bet they're good. Hey, Daniel, welcome. Hey, perfect timing. I'm sorry, took a minute to scoot you out of the waiting room. We were just giving everybody a couple more minutes to file in. I think we're gonna have a smaller group today because a bunch of folks are joining for the later section this evening. So right now we're just writing in our chat boxes. If you have a word of 2022, what is your word of 2022? I like it. Intentional. And space. That's a great one. Anna, that's something that I really need to work on too. To be good, says Catalina. I love it. And Anna says pause. Oh, that's space was Catherine. Got it. And Anna says pause. You guys are always kind of, I feel like pause and space kind of riff off of each other. I feel like you guys are always kind of flowing down the same stream together. I love it.
Anna's much better at it than me, though.
How do you, to borrow from Daniel, how do you get intentional about creating your space and your pause? Do you guys have any practices for creating that?
Well, it's more, I also like the idea of intention as well. It's come up a few times, and Anna uses it all the time. And, you know, and then a friend said it to me today, you know, somebody's intention was to, you know, was to do something. The intention was there. So I guess my intention is there to find space. That's as far as I've got.
That's great. Let me know what you find out as that intention kind of comes in as you manifest your intentions, because, you know, I always set out to create a lot of that, and then it just disappears somehow. So I'd love to hear if you find any secrets as you're practicing your pauses and your space making.
Okay.
All right, y'all. I think it's about time. Let's go ahead and get started. You can keep your chat box up, but since we're a really small group, feel free to just take yourself off mute anytime you want and jump into conversation, just like a normal classroom today. As you all know, I'm sure, we're coming into February, which is Black History Month, and today we're celebrating another wonderful Black poet, one of my favorites, Robert Hayden. Robert Hayden, I'll tell you a little bit about him, but here is a quote from him. "Art is not an escape, but a way of finding order in a chaos, a way of confronting life." And I think that describes a large part of our mission here in narrative medicine too. You know, you might also say that, you know, making stories, listening to stories, these are not escapes either, but a way of finding order in the chaos, a way of confronting life. All of you here have been to narrative medicine workshops before, so I'll skip the bit about what narrative medicine is. This is whole old hat for everybody here. And I'll just skip right ahead to Robert Hayden and who he is. He's a poet born Asa Bundy Sheffy into a poor family in the Paradise Valley neighborhood of Detroit. He had an emotionally traumatic childhood and was raised in part by foster parents. But due to extreme nearsightedness, Hayden turned to books rather than sports in his childhood. After graduating from high school in 1932, he attended Detroit City College on scholarship and later earned a graduate degree in English from the University of Michigan. As a teaching fellow, he was the first Black faculty member in Michigan's English department. Hayden eventually became the first African-American to be appointed as consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress. And here is one of my favorite of Robert Hayden's poems. It's one that I bet at least one or two other people here are familiar with, but I have never had the chance to really sit down and close read this poem before. So I thought we might take that opportunity together. Just show of hands, has anybody read those Winter Sundays in the past? Anna has. Anyone else? Kate has a little. Okay, great. Wonderful. So let's sink into it together now. I'm going to ask you, well, actually, we'll have two readers today. Can I ask for two volunteers, one to read first and one to read second, to read this poem to the group? You can just raise your hand. Daniel's first. Okay, who's second? Wonderful, Kate. Thank you so much. So Daniel, as Daniel reads, slow down, tune in, start paying attention to what the speaker is really trying to tell you. And the first read through, just focus on listening, getting the beat of the poem as well. The second read through, we'll start writing down words, phrases, images that are really grabbing our attention. But just this first time as Daniel reads, close your eyes even, just listen. Go ahead, Daniel, whenever you're ready.
You want me to read the whole thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather made banked fires blaze, no one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices?
Beautiful, Daniel. Thank you. All right, Kate, whenever you're ready, you can get started. And as Kate reads, we're just going to write down words or phrases that call our attention. You can pop them in the chat box when you're ready.
Those winter Sundays. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices?
Thank you so much, Kate. So whenever you're ready, you can either write it in the chat box or just say it out loud. Any images that are calling your attention here, any words. Daniel says, chronic angers of that house. Let's definitely return to that. While everyone else is thinking of what's calling their attention, Daniel, do you want to speak a little bit more about why that called your attention? What made you curious there?
I think that kind of brings me to like when I was a child, just kind of like it was a angry household. So just kind of how they phrase it draws me back to my own childhood and therefore kind of relate to this poem a little more.
Mm-hmm. So you can relate to that chronic anger of the childhood. That makes me wonder, is the speaker of this poem the child, or is the speaker someone like you remembering a childhood?
It seems to me to be like reminiscing, you know,
Yeah.
an adult thinking back.
So an adult looking back. What cues you into that?
He said no one ever thanked him. It's like the opportunity was missed. You know, if it was a child, you still might have time to thank him, you know. And just his reflection of what did I know, you know, of love's austere and lonely offices.
Also, I mean, it's kind of speaking in the past, because I mean, he's saying, you know, he remembers speaking indifferently, he remembers the fear, and he remembers the kind of actual kind of physical parts of it all. But he's also acknowledging, he's only in hindsight, only in now, he's seeing the images of his father driving at the cold and polishing his shoes and things. So it's kind of two looks on it in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we get two different perspectives on it now. One is, well, I mean, it's literally in past tense, you know, or actually, what tense is it in?
Is it in that kind of like that kind of, don't even know what it's called. It's like it's past tense. no, it's like continuous past tense. Or like
Yeah.
it's like always is there, you know, brackets
Yeah.
always.
I would wake and hear the cold splinter. It's a continuous past.
Yeah.
How
Sensible.
interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that really bolsters your idea about the way we have two different perspectives here. One is a kind of, he recognizes the perspective of the child and the chronic angers and how that, and the indifference of the child, or a child trying to be indifferent. And then the perspective of the adult who still has this continuous past and still carries it with him as he recognizes something that maybe the child couldn't have recognized, which was the love there too. That's really interesting. What else do you guys make of the tense here, of the time of this?
You mean like the time in terms of like what year?
Oh, that's a great question too. Sure. Sure.
Right.
What can we tell about the actual time?
It makes me kind of think that, right, maybe it was in the 70s or 60s or earlier, just from like, the father, driving out the cold and like polishing shoes. For the most part, most people don't really polish shoes anymore.
Yeah.
But driving out the cold, it makes me think that maybe they didn't have any kind of like central heating.
Yeah.
And so the father would have to do things in order to maybe bring in firewood for the fireplace, and and that was the way they kept warm.
So that might tell us a little bit about, the context of this house, of this family, of not being a very wealthy family. Maybe they, I grew up in a place where we had a wood burning stove, and that was our central heat as well. And, there are definite pros and cons to it. But I remember my father having to stoke that fire every morning, and the work that goes into creating heat for a family. So yeah, so now we're learning a little bit about pay no attention. So now we're learning a little bit about the setting here, which is both time and place. And the time we're guessing is a time when people polished shoes, and the setting is maybe not so wealthy. And we've also got an internal time to the poem too, of a continuous past, of an elder speaker looking back on a younger self. Let's go to all the other things that you guys are noticing.
Julie, I just wanted to say this, Kate,
please.
just wanted to say one more thing about the time.
Please. Yes.
In the first stanza, no one ever thanked him. Because that's punctuated as a separate sentence, and it's in the stanza that references the father's weekday labor, that seems to have an overarching time span, as if almost to comment on the father's life or position in life, that it's not just the children or the family that didn't thank the father, but that maybe throughout his lifetime he was not thanked or acknowledged for whatever work he did beyond the family.
Yeah.
That sentence is kind of shadowed in the whole kind of blur of words in that paragraph anyway. It kind of comes at the bottom corner.
Can you say that again, Anna? I didn't quite hear.
Even with going with what Kate said, it's really interesting. And I'm just noticing kind of more visually than anything that sentence is quite kind of tucked there in the bottom right corner, kind of like a shadow to everything else. If it was visual, if it was a word painting, it's right at the corner there,
How interesting. Yeah, and there are no other lines here where you get a full sentence in a single line like that. And you're right, it's tucked into the corner, almost like somebody who's never thanked. Yeah, what a great visual observation. Like a shadow. This poem seems full of shadows now that you bring up that word. I think it's a very appropriate word. Maybe we can be thinking about that word as we move along in our conversation here. Where are the shadows? What are they revealing? I want to talk a little bit about what other people mentioned here. Catherine mentioned the cracked and ached. So there's What do you, Anna, do you want to, I'm sorry, Catherine, do you want to talk a little bit more about why those words stood out to you? What do you think they suggest?
Well, pain, I guess, and kind of hard, like someone who's had a hard life, who's worked hard, who's, you know, I've seen older men with fissures in their hands, you know, that are from hard labor, you know, chopping wood or whatever. So kind of pain and that's what's jumped out at me in that first part anyway, and aching, you know, just kind of relentless and not seeming to have any end.
Yeah, and very embodied too. Where else do you see language like this in the poem, like cracked and ache?
I guess he describes the cold as splintering.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I just realized actually, I have read this because I remember imagining the child in bed, you know, kind of like Little House on the Prairie. Actually, Daniel thinks it's from the 70s. I kind of had a vision of almost like Little House on the Prairie kind of thing. And Anna just reminded me that her English teacher in school gave them this poem, and then Anna gave it to me like a long time ago. So
that's great.
So it just, yeah, it came back to me. That was the image I had.
So one thing, it seems to be coming back to it like like 9 years later.
Oh, it's been 9 years since you've looked at it?
Yeah, it has. I think he gave it to us when I was like in first year secondary school, and I must have been at like 12 or 13.
I'd be so curious to hear what you see now that you didn't see then in this poem.
Oh, there's a lot. I could write an essay, but definitely I could write an essay and have an A in my leaving cert probably now. But
you did get an A in your leaving cert.
But no, that's not something. But now a lot. I mean, I can almost apply it to my own life in a way, but that's maybe perhaps personal. But it's interesting. I mean, I wrote in the chat box there. I mean, I said my word is pause. I mean, I have probably a library of words for the year, but that's probably too many. But I mean, forgiveness has been a big word in my recent life, and that's probably just swelled up here because I think forgiveness is a big thing here.
Yes.
So
where do you see forgiveness here? This is great.
Well, where do I see it? I mean, it's kind of like touch. I mean, he kind of brushes the stroke in little bits all the time, and they come in different words, and it's implicit, obviously. But even it's kind of the it's in the stuff that we've already noticed as well. I think obviously in the hindsight there's forgiveness. I think the very last lines are quite obviously significant. And I think actually this poem introduced me to the word austere. I didn't know what that meant before I found out. I was like, what? So that's how I remember. That's how I know this poem, because I know that last line.
Let's talk about the last line. Let's go there. First, do you mind giving us that definition of austere, of what it means?
Kind of strict and kind of harsh and strict in kind of approach and manner. You know, it can come in different ways. That's maybe, it could be, that's a basic maybe definition of this, but
yeah, that's exactly right. I just Googled it. Verbatim. You're great. Severe or strict in manner, attitude, or appearance. Yeah. So in this last line, we have love, but it's not just what did I know of love? It's what did I know of love's austere and lonely offices. So austere meaning strict, lonely, and offices. What do you make of this description of love? And how does it lead us to forgiveness?
That last line for me links to the line that introduces it. What did I know? What did I know?
Mm.
I'm hearing all those vowels, the no, oh, like almost like a dog baying. What did I know? And love and austere and
Yes.
lonely and offices, all those, the sounds of grief.
Yeah.
If we didn't speak English and we were just hearing the vowels, those two lines, especially the repetition of what did I know? What did I know? There's a lament in there.
Mhm.
And the forgiveness for me might be, if I'm the child, the adult looking back on this childhood, that there was anger in the household and there was a harsh life,
Mhm.
but that the father was loving in the way he could, perhaps.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I love the detailed observation of the sound that what did I know makes of a kind of baying on the page. I love that there's a lament of what was not known.
Mm.
But I guess what could he have known as a child? You know,
Yeah.
a child doesn't have that insight. They just, they're in their body and they feel the harshness, I guess, and they feel the strictness, and they,
Mhm.
you know, and they feel the fear.
Mhm.
I also think just with those lines, with the what did I know, I mean, with what goes often with forgiveness is like forgiving yourself as well, and it kind of sounds like, you know, because it's a little bit regretful, this whole poem as well, so it's a bit of an inner kind, it's a bit of a dialogue between himself as well, and what did he know, that can either be what did he know as a child, or like what could I have known, you know, so it's self-forgiveness too.
Beautiful.
Yeah, for being indifferent, that word kind of includes him, you know, they both didn't care, you know, they both didn't try, you know, it's not just like speaking, you know, whatever, it was indifferently, which involves two.
I love that. And I love how you're reading the line, what did I know, in two different ways here. And the poem contains both, right? In one sense, we're reading it as what could I have known as a child? What could I have known? And on the other perspective, it's a lamentation of what was not known. You know, what perhaps, you know, the speaker wished they would have known of love as a child. So I love how you've found room for both to be contained. And maybe that's why there's two of them here, you know, not just a repetition. Maybe both have different meanings, one as forgiveness and the other as self-forgiveness. Huh. I really love that. So why offices? I want to kind of bring this back to what Catherine was saying earlier about the words cracked and ache. And then she noticed that, you know, as these words represented something happening in the father's body, splintering and breaking were what was happening in the cold, maybe in the house itself. So there's some sort of bridge being built between the father's body and the house that I find really interesting, especially the house's chronic angers, right? Emotion is being projected onto it there. So what does all of this have to tell us about love's austere and lonely offices? Why offices?
Yeah, I think that's a very unusual word, you know, to describe it.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of the existence.
Yeah, it's weird, I guess. There must be a good reason for using that word, because it sticks out like a sore thumb, I think, doesn't it?
It's a unique choice.
Mm-hmm.
What is an office?
A place to do work.
A working place.
A working environment.
A working place? What kind of working place? What do you think? What are the connotations of the word office? What does it make you think of?
Kind of files and sorting things, and it's kind of
Formal.
Formal, yeah.
Okay. What else?
I'm just looking it up, Julia,
Mhm.
and everybody. And one definition is a prescribed form of service or service of worship, divine office, or a ritual, a function.
Oh,
And in addition to the meaning of the office as a place where business is conducted.
so prescribed form of service or ritual? Did I get that right?
That makes more sense. That
Oh,
use, doesn't it?
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I like them both.
Yeah.
I like this. I like the image of love as an office, as a place that you go to. That my connotations, I think, with office is also a place where you're alone and intentional, and you are doing work here. But those are just my personal connotations, and I imagine this as an act of loving that is. To me, office brings it a kind of a verb quality of a work that's being done.
That's interesting. If we think of the father as being characterized as probably doing physical labor during the week,
Mhm.
but the father is polishing the child's shoes, and you don't need polished shoes to do physical labor. So in some sense, the father is preparing the son for a different kind of public presentation, whether at school or in work. And then those austere and lonely offices have a, potentially yet another meaning, that
Yeah.
this father's office, his place of doing his behind the scenes work, is lonely. And perhaps the son will be, if he moves into a different kind of life from his father, that there's a kind of loneliness associated with that also. There's a rupturing in the family that can happen.
So, oh, that's just beautiful, Kate. So now we have the office as not just belonging to the father and the father's love, but also as belonging to the son in the present as the elder son who's now literally working in his own austere and lonely office. And the schism between those two worlds, those two kinds of offices. Beautiful.
Very sad.
It resonates so well with what Anna was saying about forgiveness and self-forgiveness, both being held here.
That kind of loving the child, but being also severe to make him a good person. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying. Like giving him a kind of education with love, but I don't know, not to show it too much, like being. I hope it makes sense what I'm trying to say.
Please keep going.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking, and also I have been touched by this. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking when the rooms were warm. He'd called, sorry. And slowly I would rise and dress. And I was thinking also of two things, like on one hand, love, because he would be called by his father after the room is warm, not when it's cold. And then that anger and chronic anger, I don't know, it's something like I don't know how to say it, like love and that's that kind of fear of, I don't know if how to say it, to put it in words more clearly, but these ideas of love and fear in the same. Yeah,
Catalina, absolutely. And that's one thing that's the reason I chose this poem this particular month, because it holds anger and fear with love without trying to resolve one with the other, like I do hear a forgiveness here, but I also hear just an acknowledgement that there was a lot of anger here. There was a lot of fear here. And I don't need to fix it. I don't need to resolve it. You know, I can acknowledge that there was love here too, you know? Oh, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's like the father was also caring about his son. So he was also cared by his father.
Mhm.
This is what I,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to get a little greedy, and I want to share something that I read earlier this week that a friend of mine sent to me, just because it seems to be resonating with our conversation right now, but it's going to take us away from the poem just for a moment. I just love to hear your thoughts on this. I read this great article from the New York Times called "Against the Trauma Narrative." I posted it in our Facebook group if anybody happened to see it there or wants to see it. And it argued that this whole idea of the trauma narrative is a pretty Western idea, that, you know, or the idea that everyone needs to have, you know, a trauma narrative that then becomes a part of their healing journey. And in order to be whole and healed and, you know, the most, you know, manifested version of yourself, you need this past trauma that you then go back and resolve, which is so interesting for us in narrative medicine because we work primarily with stories about traumas. And I'm wondering how much of this is like this American idea or Western idea of the redemption tale, like the pull yourself up by the bootstraps tale. And its real critique of trauma narratives is not that, you know, it is not everybody experiences trauma. Its critique is that traumas don't have to be fixed all the time. You know, there are other endings here that contain space for acknowledgement of trauma and all of the other things that might have happened at the same time or later that might have nothing to do with it. And the way that we shape these stories doesn't need to be this arc of conflict and resolution. There are other ways to tell stories around trauma that don't always follow that same arc. And I think that this poem does a really, as Catalina's pointing out, it holds space for both, you know? And it brings us not to a statement, but to a question, which is really cool too, opening it somehow further. I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
The idea of the trauma narrative and, you know, its typical arc. What do you think how does this poem deal with trauma differently?
I actually think that's really interesting because if you look at it, you know, he grew up with fear and austerity, and you know, he might have got the odd clip or the odd smack every now and again. I mean, the chances are he probably did. So, and therefore you could consider that he had an adverse childhood and that he maybe had trauma in his early life. And, you know, he could have, I mean, he sounds like he obviously did carry it with him, but not necessarily, but I think he has come to forgiveness and a little bit of regret that he didn't understand it at the time, but there's definitely understanding. So it's not as if he had to, you know, I think he's not putting too much emphasis on the trauma of his early childhood, that I think he's probably acknowledged it and possibly, you know, but he hasn't been, you know, he hasn't been held back, hopefully, by it. You know, and he's acknowledged that there were reasons for it and there was love there and the intention was probably good. And he's come to understanding and forgiveness. That's what I think, and I think it ties in with what you've said. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm thinking also about the fact that this poem takes place on Sundays. It's recollecting Sundays. And perhaps I'm putting this onto the poem, but a Sunday is a day of worship in, you know, Christian faith. And looking at the banked fires blazing and thinking about hellfire and the weekday weather that made, or it's labor, his hands ached from labor that he did in the weekday weather, but you can also read it that the weekday weather made banked fires blaze, that the banked fires blazing can be the anger that erupts after a week packed with the weather of suffering. And just thinking about the father inheriting a certain amount, if we're talking about trauma, a certain amount of trauma, which is being passed on maybe unintentionally to the child. What am I trying to say here? And Sundays, I guess I'm thinking of Sundays to look back to forgiveness, maybe Sundays as a ritual day of forgiveness, that the love's austere and lonely offices can also sound like a reference to God, to religion, to spiritual redemption. And to a child, a parent, especially a father, can seem godly. I don't know, something, I haven't put it all together, but something, the forgiveness flavor of all of that as well, maybe.
100%. Anna, go for it.
Well, I mean, I haven't formed my exact answer either, but even just to echo Kate with definitely the Sundays, and she brought up God, and kind of just sprung to me, even all the you know, because she was saying, I mean, God, I guess it brings up that, you know, and as Catalina says, love, anger, and fear are all together. It's all inclusive. Everything in life is so inclusive. God, you know, so even speaking to someone the other day, and we were mentioning, like, you know, not from a religious perspective, but just we did bring up God, and I mean, he made everything. You know, if we did make everything, if that kind of, if that higher thing made everything, it made floods and it made sunshine, you know, so to speak. I think as well, because even when you read the poem, and I kind of find the lines, I'd wake and hear the cold splintering and breaking, is quite like, it reminds me of, I think it's, you know, when God like separates the water or something, you know, it's something very grand, very kind of huge, dominating or something. And yes, as Kate said, like, it's, you know, godly in terms of you're looking up at this figure and who kind of made you, you know, and they're kind of, they're giving you everything, their love and their fear, their anger, and, you know, for a child, I guess it's, you know, I don't know, huge, a lot, everything, too much.
I love it. I love it. I love the observation of the both ritual and divinity here. And it just echoes what everybody was saying about the temporality of this piece before as being a kind of continuous past. Even the title operates in the continuous past, those winter Sundays, evocative of a ritual, something that happened regularly. Sundays too, my father got up early. This didn't just happen one Sunday, this happened on Sundays. And it becomes its own kind of ritual. There is some sort of sacred act happening here. I really love what Kate said about this being a kind of ritual of redemption, perhaps, from all of the banked fires blazing from the weekday. Now there's from that comes warmth, you know, rather than cold or fires blazing. Now we have warmth. There's something comfortable now built here on Sundays. And I really love the idea of this father as being a kind of God figure. And it makes me think the ending is so much more profound even now, because we're imagining, you know, a version of God in his own austere and lonely offices, making tough decisions that, you know, can't be painless for him to make, you know, if we imagined this as a God figure too. Very, very interesting.
I was also thinking about some, like, feeling guilty about speaking, when I'm looking about speaking indifferently to him, and thinking about this, realizing the efforts his father did for him to polish his shoes and to make him something different than him, as we were saying earlier, like recognizing his efforts and that feeling of I don't know what I was thinking about guilty, about being guilty, like this speaking indifferently to him. And what did I know? What did I know? Like now, and now I understand what was happening then,
Mhm,
Yeah.
but then I didn't, something like that.
mhm.
And kind of two other words that came up for me maybe in the past while were like reflecting versus ruminating as well. And just as you brought up the kind of trauma arc and how you can't fix everything, you know, people tend to ruminate about their past and want to fix it, and they keep they think they're thinking creatively and reflectively on it, but it's actually just ruminating. It's kind of being sucked into it. But then there's a difference between reflecting and just kind of observing and kind of being a witness to it and kind of watching in from the window and seeing it all. So just wanted to say that as well, I think.
I agree, Anna. And just to put a finer point on that observation, who do you think that last question is written to?
Maybe to his father.
Yeah.
To what? I'm sorry.
To his father, maybe.
Maybe to his father. Who else could it be to?
God.
To himself. Maybe.
God, self, reader, maybe. It's a question that seems to go out in many directions. And I think to support your point about this being a reflection rather than a rumination, this question kind of, I don't know, it seems, do you guys take it as rhetorical, something that shouldn't be answered? Or do you take it,
I
how
think
do you read it?
I think he has answered it himself. I think he's answered it himself in I think he's come to an understanding of it by the end of the poem, and it is rhetorical. He's not expecting anybody to fix it or answer it for him.
Yeah.
It's
So
a very
it's movement. There's something been gained by the end.
there's definitely a shift. Yeah.
Okay. Definitely a shift. So that supports this idea of reflection rather than rumination too. It's not a circular pattern. There's some sort of change happening. It's wonderful.
Explaining why he didn't understand when he was a child, because it was not possible to.
I agree, Catalina. On that note, this is the perfect, her observation is the perfect segue to our writing prompt. But are there any last thoughts or any things that you want to share before we move on to our writing prompt?
Yeah, when I start, I kind of go back to it a little bit, right? And how they start sharing about Sundays too. My father got up early. And so it makes me think that perhaps that's the only day off that his father had. And no matter what, right, there's still things that had to get done. And his father was always there doing all of these things. And perhaps, right, there's this reflection, gives me the sense that perhaps that his father has passed. And maybe this is the time that, right, he's reflecting upon that just the earliness of the death, or perhaps a little bit later on. But when he does ask the question, right, it makes me kind of think, right, who's he really asking that to himself? Is he perhaps giving a eulogy and sharing it to other people? Like, what did I really know? And kind of just that recognition, as well as the forgiveness and all of it. But that aspect of love off stairs and lonely offices really just kind of grabs me and throws me back in my own childhood, and really just kind of has me facing with like my grandfather, who was very similar, where, never did he tell me that he loved me. Right. So I kind of like feel what he felt when he shares this. And because it feels like maybe I've been there before, in terms of, just that loneliness and just that strictness. So
I was gonna actually ask. I was gonna actually kind of like casually ask the people here, because I'm not sure how many people are parents here. Because I'm reading this as a daughter, as a child, so I'm reading it kind of thinking about certain people. But I'm wondering, because Daniel brought up the Sundays too. He got up early, which makes me think like weekends too. My mum was doing the wash and ironing the clothes and stuff, you know, stuff like this. So I wonder how parents, do you think of it? Do you think as a parent on this, or do you, like Daniel, think back to your child when you think of this? I just kind of wondered in a way. So I'd like to know, but personally, myself.
I have the same thought exactly as Daniel, that I think it's really important and really significant that it's Sunday and he still got up early. It's like he has no day of rest. Like Sunday traditionally would be a day of rest, but for the dad it isn't. And then I just the last line there, the loneliness. I think they were both lonely. So I think the boy was lonely, but the dad had a very lonely life. Like to be so formal and strict, and maybe, I mean, the fact that he was polishing the shoes, you know, on a Sunday and putting his, does he say his good clothes or something? Good shoes. So it's like they might have been getting ready to go out to service or to Sunday school or mass or whatever. Because I do remember my own dad, you know, polishing the shoes, and that was really important, that you could tell a man by his shoes. That my dad still says that. So it's kind of old school, and it's that, you know, that strikes me. But also I really think that he recognizes, the boy as an adult now recognizes that his father had a lonely life, like that kind of a hard and lonely life, and kind of his own making, in a way that he wasn't able to show love, he wasn't able to receive it, maybe, you know. And it's a beautiful poem. It's really sad, I think. Sad, yeah. You know, but I think that both of them were lonely and didn't know it, and maybe didn't know how to help each other.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I love that you guys are really pointing out, as lonely as this is, how lonely they both are, how love is working here. Love, what does it look like here? It looks like waking up early. It looks like polishing the good shoes. It looks like no day of rest. You know, it looks like not being thanked and doing the work anyway. And maybe it's not a love that was spoken aloud, as Daniel mentioned with his grandfather. You know, maybe it couldn't be spoken out loud, but it is shown. As I almost feel like you can almost feel this speaker and his father both reaching for the other and not quite clasping hands, but you can feel the reaching coming from both sides. And I also really love that Daniel pointed out the father's kind of conspicuous absence from the poem, though he's mentioned, you know, he does seem to not be here anymore. The line, no one ever thanked him. It's not no one has ever thanked him. You know, that line is fairly past tense. So yeah, I do wonder if this could be a kind of eulogy, or something that might have been created after the passing of the father too.
Yeah, it would be a very epic funeral wreath, but I don't think it was just reading at the funeral, but it's quite, you know, really, if someone got up and said that.
Say it one more time, Anna, I missed it again.
It's you know, I'm not quite sure if it's quite fitting for an actual reading at a funeral, but I mean, you know, it definitely would go, you know, it was jaws would drop at the altar.
Yeah.
I was saying to Anna there, like, I just can't help but compare, for example, when Seamus Heaney writes about his father, it's so different. You know, Seamus Heaney, he's the Irish poet, and if you read some of his earlier poems, a lot of them are about his father, who was also, you know, kind of, they didn't have a whole lot of money, they were from the country, and, you know, his father was a labourer, but he worked on the land. So like digging and all of that, like, but there's such affection. And even though his father was a quiet man, you know, you can sense it's very different from this. They didn't have a whole lot of money, but there was no harshness at all. There's a softness and a gentleness.
I think there's a beautiful poem called The Call, And
Oh, I love it.
it's
That's a
quite
phone call.
nice. Yeah, the call, and it's by Seamus Heaney. It's not as similar, but it's different.
Yeah, and that would have been probably probably born in the 30s or 40s. So, but it was just there's such unspoken, you know, and but again, his father never, oh yes, there's one about a telephone call, and his father never told him he loved him either, but he knew it. I mean, it wasn't like he had to guess that that's what he meant. It was in everything else that he did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, all this brings me back to this idea of the trauma narrative, you know, like how much would we pigeonhole that experience of love, never being told that you're loved, just being shown it in different kind of workaday ways? How much would a narrative have to, how much work would it have to do to figure out what to do with that kind of love, whether or not to label it as, you know, a trauma that somebody has experienced or not? You know, I'm so curious about this idea of the narrative arc. And I wonder if now that we've talked about it, you guys will notice as you're reading poetry or as you're reading stories, what is happening with the trauma? Is it going straight from conflict to resolution? Are there backstories of trauma being added to, you know, the present story that are somehow needing to be resolved as well? Or do they coexist? Is there an easy coexistence? Are there other ways of dealing with this in narrative that we haven't even discussed yet? You know, I'd love to hear not just how trauma works in narrative, but how love works in narrative too. I hope this will be a question that kind of guides us for the next month until we meet again. Maybe we can discuss together how we see narratives of love and narratives of trauma in different ways in what we're reading. I bet it really depends on cultural context too, you know, and on time, like you're saying. On era too. So let's put a pin in this conversation. I'd love to return to it and hear your thoughts on what patterns you're noticing in the narratives you're reading. So let's move on to our writing prompt today. I'm going to give us two writing prompts. This is the one I came up with before class, but Catalina inspired another one. So I'm going to give us a choice. We can either write about love's austere and lonely offices, or we can write about what you see now that you didn't see then.
sorry, what was the other one, Julia?
I'll write it in the chat box.
Yeah.
The other option is, there it is. Write about what you see now that you didn't see then. And we're going to take 5 minutes. Set timer for 5 minutes.
5 minutes, counting down.
Ooh. All right, go ahead and put your pencils down. I apologize in advance if you hear some whining in the background. We have a puppy here. You want to say hi? Oh, did you hit your head? Oh. And he's very sad because his dad just left. So you hear him crying. This
Oh,
is,
they're so scared and
this is
lonely,
Bo.
that dog.
This is Bobo. All right, guys. We have about 25 minutes, so I'd love to invite one person to share their writing with us as a group. I'm actually gonna ask either Anna or Catherine to share this time, simply because they share a screen, and then when we go off into our pods, I can share two people and those two people can share together. So we'll knock one of you guys out right now. That way when you share with somebody else, one of you can focus with the other person.
Well, I'll go. Okay, no excuses and no explanations. Isn't that
You know
right?
the rules.
Yeah?
That's
Okay.
right. Just read it. It's already perfect.
Okay. So I wrote about love's austere and lonely offices. So even though I can't remember personally experiencing austerity much in my life, I have a sense of the exquisite loneliness of it. I think of the book, The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearn by an Irish writer called Brian Moore. I think of an older patient of mine whom I think was gay, but never came out in his lifetime. And I think he lived a very lonely life. And overall, it speaks to me of terrible loneliness, of pain, of isolation, of regret, of repression and religion. That's it.
Beautiful. We're gonna have you read it one more time. This time, we're really gonna be taking notes, listening for words and phrases that make us curious. Go for it again, Catherine, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so even though I can't remember experiencing austerity personally much in my life, I have a sense of the exquisite loneliness of it. I think of the book, The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearn, which is a book by an Irish writer called Brian Moore. I think Brian Moore. I think of an older particular patient of mine whom I think was gay, but never came out and in his lifetime and lived a very lonely life, I think. It speaks to me of loneliness, of pain, of isolation, of regret, of repression, and religion.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. What did you guys hear there? Another question you might consider, how is this like or unlike Robert Hayden's poem?
It's kind of like, right, she's sharing that she's not ever experienced this austerity, but through experiences of reading and viewing of others, gives a good sense of this empathy that she has, right? So although she's never experienced it, she knows what it feels like.
So in a sense, it's answering the second question too. What do you see now that you didn't see then? It's through this discovery of empathy, through books, through a patient, through relationships, you get a feeling through empathy of what you didn't know.
Also, I think things that are perhaps not declared openly, the patient that might or might not have been gay, but didn't say so directly. And also the beginning with, I think, leading with even though, and then that leading to a compassionate inquiry about others, a willingness to be curious and to feel other people's experience, particularly with this patient who might not have been able to say what he needed to say, to have, for lack of a better word, your narrator witnessing is very moving.
I think the word isolation echoes that idea of this loneliness as being something that is not declared openly, something that is, I think the word repressed is used here as well, or oppressed. There's a sense of isolation in this pain, the exquisite loneliness of it.
I was thinking about the way that she kind of completed the narrative of the patient with the part of love from her.
Can you say that one more time, Catalina?
I said the narrative of the patient was more about pain and loneliness, and she completed his narrative with love and caring, being empathic with him, and in her voice, his voice, sorry.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. I love that. So as this speaker is acknowledging that she has experienced austerity personally, there's a reaching here, just like in the poem, to try to understand that experience in others, that loneliness in others, and in the way those stories complete each other, just like we saw in Hayden's poem, as kind of the father's story completing the son's and vice versa. That's really beautiful. Any other observations? Yeah.
Well, this is a little bit of a tangent, but there's a singer-songwriter, Mary Gaucher, who does a TED Talk about singer-songwriters who work with survivors of war, with vets, soldiers who have survived war, and helping them transform their stories of trauma into songs over the course of a weekend.
Wow.
That's so cool.
Yeah, Daniel should do that.
It's
You
a beautiful work, a beautiful talk that she does about that. I think it's 17 minutes and it's gorgeous.
I will look that up. Do you know where the best place to find it, or should I just Google Mary Gaucher?
Yeah, it's on YouTube, or I can send you the link too. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be even better. If you happen to have time, I can also just look it up. So that's wonderful. Daniel, is this resonating with you at all?
More so, right? Because I work for the Veterans Hospital, and I know there's a lot of recreational therapy, and there's other things that are out there to try to get veterans to express themselves through poetry and things of that nature. And so I don't know if they know of this, but I think this would be very powerful for them. And there's also some of my own patients who have this artistic ability and not really sure kind of what to do. And perhaps this might be something that speaks to them, and having them to not really, right, not solve their trauma, but be able to kind of process it, being able to kind of accept it in a sense.
And communicate it. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. More good homework for us until next time. Thank you so much for that, Kate. All right, Catherine, how do you feel after our reading of your writing? Did anything resonate with you there?
Oh yeah. I mean, all of it. I think everybody gets what I was trying to say.
$25 a month wage.
I'm sorry,
Live
it's me, I apologize. Just looking up the link, I'm sorry. Mhm.
All right, guys. So, Catherine, if you don't have any, do you have any last thoughts or anything that you want to say about the reflections?
I think, it was a lovely way of putting it when Catalina said about that my particular patient, that it was like we were able to complete his narrative with just, you know, curiosity and care and sharing it and acknowledging that there was something. And I thought that was just a really nice, kind of a nice way of kind of a little bit of redemption in it or something, you know, in his story. So that was really, really lovely. Thanks, Catalina, and everyone.
Yeah, there was so much empathy there. It's impossible not to catch it. So thank you for sharing that story with us. All right, friends, we're going to move on into our dyads. I am going to stop our screen share, and I am going to make some breakout rooms. So we are going to do 2 breakout rooms. So Catherine, you will just be a listener in your breakout room, and you can comment on others, but you'll focus on the other 2 speakers. I'm just going to let Zoom choose which rooms you guys go in, so it'll be a surprise for me too. You guys know how this works. You're going to share your writing. Each member is going to have about 7 minutes to share writing, and for the listeners to give feedback on that writing. Feedback should not be criticism. Everything is always perfect. All we're doing is noticing the things that really jive with us or make us ask certain questions. If anything traumatic does come up, which is absolutely fine, I would encourage you all to, again, just focus on the words in front of you, the actual phrases and images that are calling your attention, rather than apologizing to somebody for their experience. And then secondly, no qualifying, just read your work as is. You guys know the rules. I'll just create the rooms. I'll send you a little notice when it's time to switch partners. Each person has 7 minutes. Let me know via the chat box if you have any questions. All right, ready, set, go. Set timer for 7 minutes.
7 minutes, starting now.
See timer.
The timer has about 4 minutes and 51 seconds to go.
See timer. See timer.
There's only a 7 minute
We're back.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Go for it, Kate.
No, I just said we're back.
Perfect. So I know we're, as usual, tight on time. We have 1 minute left. So I'd love to hear, we started off this class by naming our word of the year that's going to set the tone for our year. I'd love to hear just a single word from each one of you that you feel describes the tone of the conversation you just had with your partner.
Powerful.
Let me say that one more time because I know that's tricky. One word that describes the tone of the conversation you just had with your partner, or the theme of the conversation, even just one word that describes the conversation you just had.
Yeah, I shared it was powerful.
Yeah, great.
Can I do 2 words?
Sure.
Deeply listening.
Wonderful.
That's so powerful. It's the same feeling.
Powerful squared. Love it.
What would you say? 10 words. I'd say visual. There's a word in Irish called it's called gutta, and it kind of means
in my kind of take on it, it kind of short and sweet and straight to the point. And I love it because it's one word, but I've just, so I kind of think that, but the point is very, very, very important. But it's short and sweet.
Straight to the point.
Yeah.
What's the word in Irish?
It's called, I actually could be wrong. I think I might be not saying it. It's called either Gunty with a G or Gunta. I'll look it up and I'll email it to Julia and she can send it on
Please,
to you.
please.
It's my favorite word in Irish anyway.
I love it. Thank you guys so much again for attending. I adore you all. I hope to see you next month. We'll have 2 more sections, hopefully next time too. Any questions or things you want to share with the group, send them my way. I'll send it out to everybody, or you can just post on the chat box here too. Stick around after if you'd like to touch base. Please, Catherine.
I just wanted to let you know we are going to see Kay Tempest, Anna and me. Yeah, she's coming to Dublin. She's coming in May, so we're going to go see her. I've got tickets.
That is so cool, guys. Please let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Well, I'll tell
bet
you
it's talk about powerful. I bet that's going to be powerful. I can't wait to hear about your experience. For those of you, does everybody here know who Kay Tempest is? They're a spoken word poet. Really, I'll send this out in the follow-up email as well. When I get Gunta's spelling from Anna, I'll send you guys some Kay Tempest and their spoken word poetry, which is just gives you all the feels. So you guys are lucky. I can't wait to hear all about it.
Thank you, everyone. See you next month.
Thank you, friends. See you next month.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Happy New Year if it's not too